I grew up watching this gentleman wrestle, and I could not stand him.
Amen.
He cheated.
Yep.
He was Russian.
Yep.
That was enough right there, just not to like the guy. But
Him and Nikita would double team.
they would cheat. One of them would distract the referee while the other one's giving the opponent the business. They'd pull something out of their boot.
Yep.
He still does that when he comes over to dinner, by the way. He'll throw an elbow over a biscuit in a minute. It's like, still can't stand. No, I'm just being serious. I never thought that I would grow up to marry his daughter. Of all things, you watching him wrestling, you think there's no way he'd have a daughter that would look good. You know what I mean? There's no way. Look at him, he's ugly. I mean, he really is. That's why he was the bad guy. He tells people this because he was so ugly that he wasn't good looking enough to be Ric Flair. You know what I mean? He was a good looking guy. So, yeah, that's right. But seriously, I'll let him share his testimony, what God has done in his life, and it is just a pleasure to have him as a father-in-law. He's really a teddy bear. I'm really more scared of his wife, Rachel's mom, than I am him. So,
should be too.
Anyway, would you make welcome my father-in-law and just a man of the Lord? Would you make welcome Brother Ivan Koloff?
I better do this section. Yes. Another hand for the Highway Revival, please. Man, if I had that much oxygen, I'd be able to go another 50 years. I mean, that was great. I marvel at Grandma would be really proud of you, Rachel. God, it's what you're doing today and singing. And Nicole, you're such a added feature that's I'm sure welcome. Philip, you're always a pro at what you do. And, I love you guys. And to mention my grandkids, I could talk all day about them. They're beautiful. But I do have to say something about my boss, my partner. She's a tremendous help to me. She loves the Lord, and my wife, Renee, she ends up carrying the big load when it comes to anything with technology or anything like that. I got a flip phone, put it that way, so that's where I'm at. I just graduated to flip phone too, from smoke signals and drums, so I'm really a little slow at technology, keeping up to that, but don't let her kid you. She's a tough lady. She's been known to put guys in place in school when she was just a youngster. Whenever they're pulling her hair or teasing her or getting on her, she turned around and knocked the guy so hard with a pencil, he's still going around trying to get that pencil out of his head. But is that a true story, right? Yeah, that's good though. I'm proud of you. Sometimes you have to be tough in life to get through it. But talking about tough, man, I've had so many opponents. It's been so tough. Matter of fact, I think all of them has been so tough. It seems I've tried to think of somebody that was a pushover for me. And even the guys that seemed like I beat up on TV, I was actually trying to get away from them whenever it looked like I was beating up on them. And I just am so happy to be able to say that I've had over 50 years in the wrestling business, because at 8 years old, I knew I wanted to be a wrestler. Because we didn't have much of family. It was 10 kids in the family on the farm, 7 boys and 3 girls, and we were raised very humble. No electricity and no running water and all this stuff. But we ended up going to a neighbor's place about 1955. I was 8 years old. I was born in 42, so no, that doesn't work out. But 1950, I guess. Anyway, ended up seeing wrestling on TV. That's what I wanted to be. And I made the mistake of voicing that in front of, I was a middle child, voicing that in front of all of my siblings. So I got my training at home before I even left home. Not only for my brothers, but my older sister. If I walked across that floor after she mopped it, I got used to ducking real good and taking that mop across my head. But she's great family. I marvel at the wisdom of people not being able to go to school and get an education, but yet raise 10 kids on the farm, no electricity. And my dad worked at Nestle's coffee plant, you might say, big one that they had in a small town in Ontario, Canada. I should say Ontario, Russia, but it's Canada. And he did that, and plus still kept the farm going. And we had about 24 head of cows to milk by hand. So it kept us busy. But hard work, I think, was one of the things that really carried me through my wrestling career, because it took a lot of hard work in wrestling. And I kept that dream at 8 years old, and ended up wanting to pursue it as a teenager so much that whenever I got caught with my younger brother playing table tennis in high school, grade 11, and we're told for the second time that put the paddles up right away when the bell rings, the recess is over. We didn't do it, we got caught, and he was going to suspend me for 3 days, the principal. And my pride just got the best of me, and I ended up, that's all right, I'm quitting, I'm going to be a wrestler anyway. And he said, you better talk this over with your parents. I said, no, I'm quitting, I'm going to be a wrestler. And to make a decision like that as a youngster, you know, I forget, 17 years old or whatever, and to go out there and be accomplishing that when you don't even know what you're doing. I was picking up bales of hay and milking cows and stuff like this. Had nothing to do with wrestling, but getting my brothers and wrestling them, I think it helped a bit to get a little courage up. But and I say to direct this towards the kids, and that's why I say it, because I'm sure not proud of the fact that I ended up getting into trouble with the law as a teenager. Not long after I quit school, maybe 6 months. We had lost the job that we had in, it was Kraft's cheese factory, hard work in the summertime because the milk production's high. Turned around and ended up getting laid off, looking for another job. We created our own job, long story short, and it was not a legal job. It was, I guess, very creative in a sense, but yet you don't think TV influences people, especially kids. We ended up, I guess, getting the idea from watching cowboys and Indians, cattle rustling and all that stuff on TV whenever we had got one as we got older. And one day we said, I think it was my older brother, to put the blame on him, ended up suggesting we pick up one of these calves and take them to the sale about 20 miles away to Ottawa and get some money. We did. We got about 30 bucks. And what we did is go out in the field, corner the calf. One of us headlock him and drag him to the car and put him in the back seat, took a prisoner, take him to the sale. We sold him and ended up pretty good. That went pretty good. The only thing is $35 don't last a long time, even back then. So we ended up next time, it was 2 calves, then 3 calves. And pretty soon we'd have so many calves plugged into that car, we had to have the back seats taken out, and it was a job. I was a driver, designated driver, and I can remember some chases, the neighbors who were stealing the cattle off of them, not close neighbors, but they're still farmers, and they ended up chasing us, and or the police, a couple of incidents, and I had lost them each time, but I can remember my brother, you know, being the lookout guy, sitting over there, and I was a little leery because not only did I have to watch for police and his clues about what he's seen, but the cattle, you know, you had half a dozen calves in the back seat, and some of them pretty big because we got to learn that the bigger they are, the more you get for them. But they do have to go to the bathroom, and it was, anyway, the type of thing that was a very nervous job, to say the least. Long story short, I guess I get to the end of that. But we did get complimented by our mom. One time I remember, and I felt actually really ashamed of myself. We were on the weekend, we had to clean the car out, of course, and because of the people, the company that we kept in the car. We ended up not only hosing the outside of the car off, but hosing the inside. My mom come out and said, "I'm very proud of you boys. You know, keeping the car clean. You're proud of your car. You worked hard for it. But why are you cleaning the inside with the hose?" "Oh, just to clean it, Mom. We want to make it clean." Anyway, you know the reason why we were doing that. But ended up as people that break the law goes, you end up getting caught. And it wasn't long before we got caught. We did half a dozen trips, but I remember the night that the police came down on us was about 4 cop cars waking us up about 3 in the morning. We had to get up around 5 to do the chores and everything. We milked the cows by hand and everything. Here we are, hauled off to the jail, the county jail, about 30 miles away, and we're in there for about a month, the 3 of us. My youngest brother was 16, I was 17, older brother was 18. Of course, he was in trouble before, so he more or less, they looked at him as a ringleader, but I was the one that instigated the whole thing. So, and I guess they figured that out a little later, but when it came to the sentencing time, I'll never forget, the judge really scared me. He said, 50 years ago, I would have hung you for this offense. This is before he passed, his sentencing. And my heart dropped. I said, "Man, he's going to send me to be executed, for stealing cattle?" But no, he still sent me for a few months to the penitentiary, and it was scary place. It was a very, very scary place. I could remember being in there like for 5 months. It was maximum security penitentiary, by the way. Murderers and gangs in there, and I can remember going to my cell at night, and that's the only time you got away from everything, and getting on my knees and praying and asking the Lord to get me out of there. And I didn't know how to pray really. I was raised Roman Catholic, and all I knew was the Our Father and the Hail Mary, and I understand later on that you can't pray to the Virgin Mary to reach the Father. It's only to Jesus. So I don't know how many of my prayers reached up, but I guess we got through it. So I guess the Lord had his hand on it to a certain degree anyway. He was making us go through a learning process, but we ended up getting out, and I ended going back to work with my younger brother at a job in Ottawa, Ontario, Carleton University. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but we were instrumental, my younger brother and I, Morris, were instrumental on helping build the foundation of that in 30-degree below zero winters, one winter. And got a call from another brother that was about 300 miles away in Hamilton, Ontario. He was married and ended up living there, working in a steel company, and he ended up calling me and saying he found a wrestling school because he knew I wanted to be a wrestler. And I was talking that all the time, wanted to be a wrestler. And he told me to come to this city because there was 2 wrestling schools there. That's all I need to hear. I quit the job right in the spot. And I said to my younger brother, "You can have the car?" He said, "No, I'm going to. I'm going to be your partner." So off we went. And ended up getting the job at this steel company, Stelco was called, and it employed about 10,000 employees, big factory. I think it's gone now from Chesterville, Ontario, but I ended up working there for about 2.5 years in Hamilton, Ontario, I should say, where the steel company was, but I was raised in this Chesterville, Ontario, so I always go back to that as a farm where we lived. But we ended up, this Stelco was hard work, but I worked my way up. I was the youngest union steward there. And I figured out that, man, I'm doing good. I've become a union steward. But the reason why they made me a union steward, they voted me in unanimously because I was gullible enough to go and represent everybody that had trouble with the company and nobody wanted the job. But I just go in and it makes sense. I would say, they'd pull out the book and they'd say, "Well, actually this guy here was supposed to be wearing his hard hat." And I was saying, "Look," I just say common sense. I just say, "Never mind the book. Let's talk from our heart. Don't you have any sympathy for this guy?" Feeling is obviously his one hand is crippled. Anyway, I did okay at the job, so it learned me a little bit of, I guess, to being able to relate to people and contracts and stuff like that. Enough so that whenever I ended up going to the wrestling school, and that was a story in itself. There's so many tales I tell in my book and everything, but I ended up once did I go to a wrestling match, but every Thursday night they had a wrestling show at this gym, and they charged about like $1 to get in. I ended up going there with my younger brother because the teacher, Jack Wentworth, was a British Empire champion. He was the one that was training us. He ended up saying, you come Thursday night, and then Friday you can come in and start the school lessons. Well, but maybe if you watch some of the matches, you can pick up some stuff. Bad decision, because I was used to fighting in the bars and all that after I had some energy or some courage from a few drinks, and ended up knowing a little bit about fighting or getting my jaw jacked a few times anyway. So I ended up, my younger brother and I were sitting in the front row, and I'll never forget the two big guys were beating up on the owner, Jack Wentworth. He was a good guy, with Johnny Reed, a police officer that was a part-time wrestler, and beating him up. And my brother poked me and said something about, let's get him. And that's all I needed to hear. I jumped up. He didn't come with me, though. I jumped up, and I reached up and hit the big guy in the stomach that was on the apron holding onto the tag rope, while the other guy was fighting the other guy on the other side. This guy was a big man, Al Bell. He was about, I'd say 6'6", 3'1". Anyway, I hit him just right or just wrong. Ended up hitting him so that he went down to his knee because I hit him hard. I was really lifting weights, taking it serious, and I was bench pressing. I got it up to around 400 pounds by then, and squatting 400 pounds. So I was getting a pretty big kid, like a couple 100 pounds. And the other guy came around. I knew enough I had to cut him off, so I jumped down, picked up a chair, and hit him over the head with it. But I wasn't part of the show or nothing. I really think it helped me in the long run, because the guy that owned the place, I guess he thought that this guy is either really going to be good or he's going to get himself killed or crazy. Because he's acting crazy. Anyway, he got me some shots. Like I ended up going and wrestling Bruno Sammartino, my hero. He had just won the title in '63, and he lived in Pittsburgh. And I was supposed to take another guy's place to go down there. And sure enough, I went down there, but I got tricked. When I got down there, one of the old timers in the dressing room, they always like to kid the guys, the new guys. What he did is he told me, look, whenever Bruno goes down, Bruno always said a prayer, went down to his knee and said a prayer. And I found out later the reason he did that was because a guy got hurt real bad when he was sparring with a guy, and he always prayed for himself and his opponent. What a nice guy, right? But Bruno Sammartino, 290 pounds from Abruzzi, Italy, he was my hero. And I got there and I was picked to wrestle him on TV, but these guys told me whenever he goes down on his knees and prays, attack him, because the promoters will be watching and then you'll make a name for yourself. So I listened, and I ended up doing that. And I'll never forget Bruno's face, because I could hit pretty hard and kick hard. A young kid, I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew how to kick hard, punch hard. But I remember his face looking up at me like, what's this crazy kid doing? But he didn't take him long to get to his feet and throw me around like a rag doll. And he never remembered it after that, thank God, because I never brought it up to him. But later on, come back 8 years later, I was wrestling at that time under a different name. I was Red McNulty, this Irish guy with red hair and red beard and all that stuff. But I ended up going out to the West Coast for a couple of years, got a trip to Japan. I met the promoter's brother from Montreal, Jacques Rougeau, and we became friends over there. And he says, man, I was about close to 300 pounds, 290 pounds then. And I was really lifting weights, and young guy, and I was really learning the ropes. And he said, why don't you come to Montreal as a Russian? I think you'd make a good Russian. Shave your hair off, leave your beard. I says, yes, sir, in New York second. So he called his brother, just on his word. His brother gave me a starting date for about 3 months from then, and I showed up. And I was there, and that was the start of Ivan Koloff, '67. I ended up winning the Canadian belt, and then from there going on to New York in '71 and winning the WWF belt, which now is the WWE belt. So I was actually the third guy to ever have the belt, but man, that was quite an experience, to say the least, because whenever they had me in Montreal, the way they featured me was they'd have my opponent in the ring, and they'd have me come running from the dressing room out to the ring, run out around the outside of the ring about 5 times while they announced my opponent. And then when I heard him announce, I'd jump in the ring, I'd attack him, beat him up, put him in an inverted backbreaker, that's bending him over, picking him up on my shoulder, and then dropping his head in the turnbuckle, and jumping out of the ring, run around out in the ring, back to the dressing room. After you do that about 6 months, you start getting in shape, you know, and I was, and it really paid off, because they started noticing me, and they started flying me at different places like St. Louis and Toronto, and I guess they're trying to feature me, like, you know, and it worked, because I ended up getting a shot in New York and winning the title against Bruno, and but not until I wrestled him for just a whole year, 1969, and I left, went to Australia for a 10-week tour, got a call to come back and wrestle Bruno again, and I kind of thought it funny, but I think he was hurt, and I ended up getting the title anyway. Not keeping it very long, but just to win the title, especially against Bruno, really put my name on the map. And oh, I remember some crazy things. I got so many stories to tell. Just for an example, do anybody remember Mr. Fuji, a Japanese guy? He was like a manager and that, real like sneaky guy and everything, but he was more or less the villain type thing, like manager. And he ended up riding with me one day. We used to take turns driving, you know, because you had long trips back then. You wrestled 7 days a week. Well, we're coming from Charlotte, going to Greensboro, and there forecast snow for that day, that night type thing later. And he says, Ivan, would you drive? I said, no problem, Fuji. I'm from Canada. I know what snow's like. I'm used to driving in the snow. I'll drive. Well, it was a trip. I thought I knew how to drive in the snow anyway, where he had a rental car, because his car was his turn to drive, and his car was in the shop, so he had a rental car. And I was driving the car back from Greensboro, and they're doing a Business 85. They're right there at Salisbury. They're building a new off-ramp. And I wasn't too sure of the roads because of this, and I was saying, I think I'll go left here, right? Mr. Fuji says, no, right, brother, right. Anyway, I went to go right, and then I realized, no, it is left, and lost control, and it started spinning. The car went down a deep ditch, and I got Mr. Fuji, Hatari, which was a Japanese referee, and one other guy that was Japanese. All 3 Japanese guys were the foreign car, you know, me being the Russian guy. Anyway, here I am holding onto the wheel, out of control now, spinning the highway, a deep culvert. I mean, like down 15 feet deep down, but it gradually went down. And I said, man, we're going to hit that ditch. And sure enough, as it's spinning in the air, I'm looking in the mirror. I can't do nothing. You can't stop the car. It's out of control. You'd see the 6 eyes that usually, little slanted eyes, you know, with Japanese guys, they're really small eyes. These are like, they're like saucers, you know, they're looking scared. And the car went and landed down at the bottom of that culvert, and just like it was meant to land. And it stalled out, turned the key, and started right up again, and drove right out of there. Mr. Fuji says, brother, I'm glad you were driving. I never could have done that. I said, Fuji, I didn't do that on purpose, you know. It's just an accident. Oh, so many crazy things happen. Airplanes, fighting on airplanes, and I could tell stories all day long, but the bottom line was that I was getting out of hand, to say the least. If you don't think I was out of hand when I first started in the business, I was really getting out of hand, because I got injury when I left Minnesota after I had lost the belt in New York. Those territories back then, I went to Minnesota, and I wrestled a couple of years there, and injured my lower back real bad, and ended up should have had surgery on it, but I ended up starting to take muscle relaxers and painkillers, and I had already been drinking and probably too much, and it was always a 6-pack or a 12-pack on the way home. So now I'm mixing these drugs with that. And the reason why I tell you that, guys, is not because I'm proud of it. No, I'm telling you this was wrong for me to do that because it hurt my career and it hurt my body, you know, ended up. But I got so bad that I was doing crazy stuff, like selling the stuff and carrying a gun and all this stuff. And it's a wonder I didn't end up back in jail, only by the grace of God that I ended up pulling it off and not getting into some serious trouble. And Nikita called me one day after I quit the WCW, and Nikita had quit too for a while, and we're keeping in touch. And I respected Nikita. He was a college graduate, and I had done him a favor getting him in the business, I guess, so we remained friends. And he ended up calling me one day, and you know, I was struggling for 3 or 4 years. I thought I could do it. If I could get into wrestling, I could quit the drugs, I could quit all this stuff and straighten up, you know, but I throw it away and just go right back to it. Well, Nikita said on the phone, when he got my attention, he says, Uncle Ivan, he said, I think you need Jesus in your life. I said, Nick, what are you talking about? I was raised in church. I know who Jesus is. He says, it's not that, Uncle. He says, the devil knows who Jesus is too. That don't make him a Christian. And I said, okay, tell me more. He says, well, you have to become a born-again Christian, he says. You have to actually ask to receive Jesus, you know, and realize that you're a sinner and that he paid the price for it, and, you know, and come into your life. So he says, why don't you come to the revival? He says, I became a born-again Christian just a couple of months before that. And he says, come to the Assembly of God Church. They're having a big thing with Terence Rose from England, a pastor there that was very anointed pastor, I guess, because he ended up having a full church, and it held about 2,500 people, and the people were very excited. And so I promised Nikita I would stop in after, because I tried to make a deal with the Lord that if I started doing some good works like autographs for the Children's Miracle Network, but I had already been doing that for about 2 years. I ended up saying, well, after I come back, because I was in Winston-Salem doing autographs, and that's Sunday, and Sunday night I said I'll stop by the church and get the evening service. And I did, and it was a good decision, because I got in there and I was convicted, listening to the word, you know, and I heard him say things like, there's one God, one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by him. Amen. There is a way that seems right unto man, but the ends thereof are the ways unto death. It is appointed unto man once to die, after this the judgment. For a man's life consisteth not of the abundance of things he possesses. What should it profit man to gain the world and lose his own soul? For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life. God has given us eternal life, and that life is through his Son. I got to the point, I says, this is what Nikita was explaining to me, that if I'll have another chance, that Jesus paid the price on the cross. All I got to do is ask him to come into my heart. Forgive me of my sins, and he'll forgive me of all my sins, and I'll have a new start. I was so, that made me excited. I was happy. And man, I think I was one of the first ones up front that received this great gift. And I needed it real bad, because everything else nothing else was working for me. Everything else is falling straight. And I just couldn't lick this habit of drugs and alcohol. And I ended up coming forward that day, and I don't know if it's part of this conducive to this church or not, but it's part of my testimony. As I came forward and I received Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior, I realized that people were falling down. They're just falling down. I remember thinking to myself, I could see if that was Andre the Giant knocking me down, or something. I don't think I'll be going down here, but